Butterscotch.
Shenanigans.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Seth from Butterscotch Shenanigans, and this is episode 2 of how to make video games. And this is, we're going to be making a simple game in this tutorial, and we're using Game Maker Studio 2 to do it. If you haven't watched the previous episode, I suggest you go back and start there, because this is a sequel. So here's what we're working on. We are working on putting together the core components of a simple game. We're going to be making a game that's sort of like our game Roid Rage. And in the last episode, we talked a little bit about inputs, and I showed a couple of commands on getting keyboard inputs. So we're going to be using A and D to turn the spaceship in this game. And the spaceship will just continually move forward, and we're going to be trying to navigate an asteroid field and picking up good stuff. So let's just do this. All right, so these are the inputs. This is the action that we can take. We can turn left and right. So the next step to sort of complete the set of things we need is we need some kind of a goal, which means we need to give our spaceship something good to pick up so that we can start accumulating score or points or whatever we want to call it. In Roid Rage, we called it juice, but really, it's score. Let's be real. So let's jump right in. So we're back in Game Maker 2. We're in the project, and before we had our spaceship sprite, which is this little thing. We had our player object, and we have our room 0. And you can see our player's still there, chilling in room 0. All right, so the first thing we want to probably do is make some kind of a visual representation of what the thing is that we're going to be picking up. So I'm going to create a new sprite. So I'll right-click on Sprites and hit Create. And once again, this thing is 64 by 64. It's probably fine, whatever. Maybe we'll shrink it down a little bit. So let's hit Edit Image, go to the Image menu here, and we can resize all frames. Let's make it, let's make it 40. A lot of times you'll see programmers try to do everything in powers of 2, so they'll make things like 32 by 32, 64 by 64. That's a thing that you don't need to worry about, frankly, especially in 2D games. Just make stuff however big it needs to be, and don't worry about it. Okay, so I'm gonna make this thing circular. It's generally a good idea to do things that are kind of round for like good stuff, because things with spiky edges to them tend to signify that they're bad. And so by having something that's nice and round, then it's kind of like, ooh, this is nice. And so here's our sprite. We just got this kind of yellowish circle thing. This is going to be our good thing. Maybe it's a coin. I don't know, whatever. Point is, it's good. And we'll give it a name. So just like we did with the player, we start with SP underscore. And yeah, let's call it a coin. It's a coin. And here it is in its full resolution. So not zoomed in at all. And we're also going to keep the origin at the center of this thing. Okay, so we have our coin, and now we need to make an object for the coin. So I'm going to right-click on the objects folder, create, O underscore coin is the name of this object. Hit enter. I'm going to select in the O coin object. Also, one nice thing with Game Maker Studio 2 is when you create a new object or a new anything, it'll automatically pop that open in the editor. So this is already here ready for us to go. So I'm going to click on the sprite, and I'm going to say SP coin is the sprite for O underscore coin. Okay, so now anywhere we put this object in the world, it'll have this visual representation. And now I'm going to do this in a really sort of ham-fisted kind of way. I'm just going to take this coin object, and I'm just going to drag and just dunk a bunch of them out into the room. And this is not how we're going to end up doing it, but this is just an example of sort of testing how we're gonna interact with the coins. So we just need some coins to be there, so I'm just going to put some coins there. All right, I'm going to hit the play button, and we'll see what happens. So it should be just like it was before. I should be able to fly around, except now there's these coins, and I cannot interact with them because we don't have any collision code in there yet. So let's go ahead and hook up some collision code. Okay, so a good rule of thumb is to have your collision event be in the object that's going to have the fewest number of itself on the screen. So we have a lot of coins, but only one player, so let's put the collision event inside the player object. Also, this is as a sort of term of art. When you have lots of objects out in the room, these are referred to as instances. So the object is what's over here in your resource tree. You can kind of think of the object like a template. And an instance is when that object actually gets turned into something in the game world. And every instance then has its own unique set of variables. So for example, this coin has a different set of XY coordinates than this coin does. Even though they come from the same base object, once they're out in the world, we have two separate instances of the coin object. So if you hear me throwing out the term instance, then that's what that means. It's a unique version of an object out in the world. Okay, so in the player object, we're going to add a new event, and we're going to say collision. So we have all these different options to choose from, and when we go to the collision option, we can choose what the collision event is with. So we could have the player collide with other player objects, which could be something you might want to do if you made like a multiplayer game, same screen or something like that. We're gonna collide with coins. Boop. So just like before with our step event, we have this chunk of code that we are going to be running, and in our create event we have code that runs there. So this collision event, all it's going to do is it's going to say whenever GameMaker detects that we've collided with a coin, then whatever code we put here is going to be run. This is our instructions. And collision events have a special variable called other. And other refers to the thing that we are banging into. So, for example, if I say with other, and the with statement is especially powerful because with allows you to run code inside another instance. So even though I'm programming inside the player object, when I put with other inside a coin collision, then whatever code I put here is actually going to run inside of the coin that I'm running into. So I'm going to call a function called instance destroy. So the basic sort of set of instructions here is when I run into a coin, then we're going to go inside that coin and we're going to run this set of instructions, instance destroy, which wipes out that particular instance who is calling that function. So all this should do now is it should be whenever I bang into a coin, the coin should just disappear. So let's try it. Boom. There we go. So we're now destroying the coins, which is great. But we probably want to actually get something positive out of it as well. And so let's make a new object to keep track of what's going on in the game world, and we can use that object to also keep track of our score or whatever. So I'm going to right click again. I'm going to create a new object. And this object is O_controller. And for every game that we ever make, we always have a controller object, which is kind of like your hub that decides where things are going to spawn. It creates all the other instances in the game. It'll keep track of lots and lots of important stuff. And so it's nice to have sort of like this. It's like your air traffic controller at an airport. It's the thing that makes sure that everything else is running properly. So in the controller event, I'm going to add a create event. and we're going to create a global variable. And a global variable is a variable that anybody can see. So any instance in the world can refer to a global variable, and that makes it really nice for things like score or coins or whatever. So there's two ways to declare a global variable. One is like this, where you start. So if you remember in the player object when we declared the movement speed, we just did this. Move speed equals 6. These are instance variables that only live inside of this player instance, and nobody else can see them under normal circumstances. But a global variable needs to have a little bit extra stuff around it so that we know that it's global, and that's where this global var comes in. So you can kind of see the difference here, right? Instance variable, just move speed equals 6. Global variable, global var, coins equals 0. Another way to declare a global variable is to use global dot. So if you said, global dot coins equals 0. Supposedly this is the preferred method to do this, and in theory global var is deprecated. However, I don't want to have to type global dot every time I refer to a global variable. I'd rather just type the variable name. So I still always use global var, and I find it very convenient. But just for clarity, I always make global variables all caps so that I know what's global and what's not. So in the controller, we're going to say coins is equal to 0, and when we bang into a coin, then in the player, before we destroy the coin, we're going to increment the number of coins we have. And if we want to get some quick insight into what's happening under the hood, we can use debug messages. So we'll say show debug message coins plus string coins. This is a function that will put output into the console, so that instead of having to display it on the screen or whatever, we can just quickly give ourselves an idea of what's happening. And last but not least, this controller object, I have created it, but I haven't put it into the world. So I'm going to open up the room, and I'm going to drop the controller in there. You may notice that the controller looks a little different, right? It's this weird gray circle with a question mark. That's because we never gave it a sprite, and we actually don't want to give it a sprite because it's just an invisible object that just keeps track of stuff. So you can have objects in the world that exist to just kind of serve a purpose behind the scenes, but they never actually show anything on the screen. Okay, so just to recap, we made a controller object, we initialized a coin global variable, and we updated the player's collision with the coins that will increment the coins global variable, and then we will show a debug message that says how many coins we have so we can keep track. Okay, so let's open this up, and down here in the output section, we should see whenever we bang into a coin, coins 1, coins 2, coins 3, coins 4, coins 5, coins 6. Okay, so you can see down here, it's doing the thing it's supposed to do, which is we are incrementing some kind of a score when we pick up coins. So that's great, except that the player doesn't have access to the console, and so we have to display these coin values on the screen. So we're going to do that through an interface. So I'm going to make another new object. We're going to call this O_interface. And we're going to use our controller object to create this interface. So we'll go back to the controller, and we have a couple of functions for creating instances. We can do instance create layer or instance create depth. GameMaker has a set of layer functions that you can use to sort of optimize your game by assigning certain layers to certain sort of like sets of things, and it'll always process them in that order for visuals. But at this point, we'll just use instance create depth because it's a little bit easier to understand and work with. So we're going to create an interface object. It doesn't matter where we put it. And we're going to call it O_interface. So this means when the controller event or the controller object is created, then it is going to spawn the interface, an instance of the interface object as well. Okay, and let's open up the interface. And remember, our goal here is to display to the player how many coins they have so that we can keep track of their score. Which means before we do that, we also need a font. So I'm going to right click on fonts and create. Pro tip, don't use Arial. Pretty much anything is better than that just because of how boring it is. What we like to do generally is we will pick one font for sort of like headers. So like kind of a fancier font for titles and headers and stuff like that. And then a smaller font that is generally a lot more readable. So I'm going to just make this font's pretty readable, kind of gets the job done. So I'm going to call this FNT Reg. So this is my regular font. And yep, that'll do it. So we have our font. Now we need to go into our interface object and render this text onto the screen. So I'll say add event in the interface object. And now we're going to go to a new type of event that we haven't looked at before, which is a draw event. Anytime that GameMaker displays something on the screen, that's happening through the draw event. And we have lots of different types of draw events. The two core ones are the draw and the draw GUI. GUI stands for graphical user interface. And the GUI layer is what we're going to use to render the interface, because the GUI layer is always drawn on top of everything else. And so you don't have to worry about like a button, going behind your player or something like that. So let's add the draw GUI event. And this is where the magic of interfaces happens. For now, we're just going to draw our coin values in the top left corner of the screen because that's super easy to do, and our goal is to just get something functional. So we're going to use a function called draw text. So if I start typing draw text, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different options. So I can just do basic draw text color, draw text ext, blah, blah, blah. Let's just do draw text color, which means we don't have control over like rotation of the text or scaling or whatever. It's just a basic position thing. So we're going to draw text at position 5, 5. So that's 5 pixels in from the left of the screen and 5 pixels down from the top of the screen. And you can see the arguments. I'll move this. You can see the arguments down here for this function. So this is the X and Y position, and the next is the string. And for the string, we are going to have the word coins, and then we're going to add that global variable. So this is what we're going to display, is this thing right here, coins plus the string and then the actual number of coins. The next argument, so you notice we have C1, C2, C3, C4. So you can provide 4 colors to this draw text color function, and it works like a gradient. So it goes top left corner, top right corner, bottom right corner, bottom left corner. So it kind of works its way around, and you can, so if you did say like a C yellow. So all the built-in colors just start with C underscore. So if you type C underscore, then you'll see a list of all the options you've got. And there's quite a few built in, and you can also make your own colors, which we will cover a little bit later on. So if we do something like C yellow, yellow, and then orange, orange, that means the top left and right corners will be yellow, bottom left and right corners will be orange, so it'll fade. It'll be a nice gradient from yellow to orange from top to bottom. And then alpha is the visibility of it in terms of transparency. So alpha of 0 is invisible, alpha of 1 is fully visible, and anywhere in between is, you know, some semi-transparent version of the thing. So let's just make the text fully visible. I'm just going to go ahead and hit play, and this isn't quite going to be what we need, but I just want to show you what this does. All right. Okay, so you notice I set up that font, but then I have some weird other thing going on up here. That's because I never told GameMaker to use the font that I created. So I can see the coins up there, but it doesn't look the way I want it to look. So we're going to use the function draw set font, and we're going to set our font, and we're good. Now if you remember, also if you middle mouse click on any function, on any resource name, on anything like that, so if I middle click on font reg, then that'll open up that font and I can look inside of it. If I middle click on draw set font, then that pops open the documentation for this font, and it'll tell me all the stuff I need to know, or sorry, for this function. So it'll tell me everything I need to know about how it works. It'll give me examples and all that stuff. So now that we've told GameMaker to use our font, let's try again and see if this does what we need it to do. Okay, so our font is in much better shape now. So it's using the font that we wanted it to use. There's also, let's say we wanted to move this to be displayed in the middle of the screen instead of in the top left corner. How would we go about that? So for starters, we would need to figure out how wide the interface is. And we can do that by using the function display get GUI width. And from there, we can draw the text at the position interface width times 0.5. So that's going to be halfway across the width of the interface. And we'll leave the Y position alone because vertically it's fine. So here we go. All right, so this has moved it to be displayed in the middle, which is great, except it's left justified, which means it's, even though we're displaying it from the middle, it's moving off to the side, which is not what we need. So we'll use an extra function called draw set h align, which is horizontal alignment, and the parameter is fa underscore center. FA is short for font alignment. So you may notice if you hit FA, you'll have FA bottom, FA left, middle, right, top. So you can also set vertical alignment. So if we do draw set V align, FA top, I believe it's top by default. So, you know, we don't have to worry about that too much doing it this way. But so this should draw our coins centered in the top middle of the screen. Okay, so we've got collision with coins. We're picking coins up and we're keeping track of them on the top, which is a nice start. And there's one final piece of the puzzle here before we end this episode, which is you may notice something interesting about when I'm banging into the coins, which is they seem to trigger their collision event before I actually touch them. So you notice they go away before the visual space of the spaceship actually bumps into them. So why would that be the case? It's because in a game engine, there is a difference between what you see happening on the screen and what's actually happening under the hood when it comes to things like collisions between objects. And every engine will kind of do this differently, or they'll kind of use different terminology. And in GameMaker, it's referred to as a collision mask. A collision mask is an invisible shape that gets drawn, or that gets calculated underneath the object, and when the invisible shape of the spaceship bumps into the invisible shape of the coin, then that counts as a collision. So it doesn't actually have to do with the pixels that we see, it has to do with the shape under the hood. And so if we open up our spaceship and we actually look at that collision mask, then we'll see what's happening. So if we pop open the collision mask tab, the darkened area represents the collision space, which you may notice there is no spaceship here in both of these sort of corners, but the collision mask does extend there. So if I were to switch the mode to manual mode and then resize this collision mask to something like this, then now the coin would have to bump into this particular spot of the spaceship in order for that to count. So this would, if we do it this way, this would mean that we have this kind of big area in the front where if we bang into something, then it wouldn't count, which is a little bit weird. So generally speaking, you want your collision mask to be, kind of a little bit inside of the visuals, but still a pretty good approximation. And so in this case, I'm going to switch from using a rectangle over to a diamond. And we're going to do something like this. So this should be fine. So that way if I bang into something with the sort of front, point of my ship, then it'll count as a collision. And if something kind of shoots by me or on the backside or whatever, then, whatever. This will be good enough for now. And we can revisit this later when we get an actually better spaceship in there. And let's also look at the coin's collision mask. Let's see what's happening there. So the coin is doing the same thing where it has this rectangular collision mask, and the corners of the collision mask go all the way out to the edge of this box, but the coin is a circle, and so there's these giant sort of invisible areas in the corners that technically count as a collision, but they shouldn't. So we're going to once again change the shape of this collision mask. We're going to change that to an ellipse. And sure enough, this is now exactly adhering to the shape of the circle. So if I switch this over to manual, then you can see this sort of darkened area is the mask. So since a coin is a good thing, then we want it to be really easy to collide with it. So we should just have this collision mask just cover the full area of the coin. And it's also oftentimes a good rule of thumb that if you have something that's bad that can injure the player or something like that, then it's okay to have the collision mask be a little bit smaller than the visuals, so that if it shoots past the player and just barely grazes them, then it doesn't count and the player can feel like they're really good at the game even though they're not actually that good at the game, because it doesn't count. Okay. So we've just adjusted our collision masks. So again, the coin is now a circle collision mask, and the ship is now this diamond shape. And let's hit play and see if that feels a little better. So this should mean that we actually have to really bang right into the coins to get it to work. So yep. So that is a lot tighter, and that is a lot more like what we would expect to be the case. All right, so that's going to do it for this episode, and just to kind of look at our progress. So our plan is to put together a simple game where we have an input, an action, a goal, and an obstacle. So we just wrapped up the concept of a goal, which is to collect coins, and that means the next phase of the game that we have to work on is obstacles. And once we have all these little pieces in place, then we have to figure out how to balance the game, how to do things like spawning the coins and the obstacles into a meaningful fashion, as well as doing the work to actually make the game feel good. Because you may notice that what we have right now is super boring to engage with. And that's okay, because every game starts there and has to kind of, you have to add in the special effects and the sound effects and all that fun stuff. So we'll be covering that stuff in later episodes. So this wraps up our tutorial on getting goals and collisions and stuff in there. And next time, we'll hit obstacles. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Butterscotch.